Have you ever found yourself in one of those, one of the grand European museums, maybe in Paris or London,
Mm-hmm.
and you're moving, from the 18th century wing into the 19th and early 20th century galleries,
Right.
and you experience this just palpable cultural shift. It's almost like whiplash.
Oh, absolutely. On one wall, you've got these truly massive canvases. I mean, they take up the entire wall.
Exactly. Hyper-realistic depictions of Roman generals, looking stern and noble.
Or a monumental allegory, some Greek god rising from the ocean with perfect chiseled anatomy.
Or, Satan surveying his conquered domain, these huge, grand narrative subjects, epic stuff.
And then you turn the corner, and it all changes. The scale just shrinks.
The technique loosens up completely.
And suddenly you're looking at a painting of a blurry, hazy harbor at sunrise, or a series of, identical haystacks painted 5 different ways.
Right, or maybe just a snapshot of a handful of working people sitting quietly at a bar, just completely absorbed in their own private thoughts.
It's such a dramatic pivot.
And if you stop and really think about it, the question is just, it's inescapable.
Hmm.
Why? Why did painters trade those epic, sweeping stories, the gods and the battle scenes, for these subjective, everyday moments?
Why did they abandon the monumental allegories for what seems, on the surface, so trivial and fleeting?
Yeah.
That aesthetic pivot, that sudden massive change in focus, is what we are performing a deep dive into today.
Check.
And our sources reveal that this shift was not, as so many critics at the time were claiming, a sign of intellectual decline.
Or artistic failure, or that they just lost the skill.
Exactly. Quite the opposite. We're analyzing sources that argue this was one of the most calculated, strategic, and frankly successful revolutions in the history of art.
So not a failure, but a strategy.
It was Painting's high-stakes fight for survival against a brand-new technological adversary.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our chronicle today is going to reveal how a new technology, the camera, created a profound existential crisis for an ancient art form,
Mm-hmm.
and how the artists responded, not by trying to, beat the camera at its own game, but by strategically redefining their own job description.
That's the key, redefining the job.
Our mission today is to understand why abandoning the pursuit of objective realism, of those grand narrative scenes for subjects like shimmering, subjective landscapes, and the quiet complexities of the modern urban subject, why that was a calculated, philosophical, and yes, a courageous move that saved painting from obsolescence.
And in doing so, paved the way for absolutely everything we now call modern art.
To really grasp the severity of this crisis, we have to look back at what painting's primary function had been for centuries.
Right.
It's so easy for us, living in the age of the iPhone, of instant digital capture, to forget that painting wasn't originally just decoration.
Or just personal expression.
Exactly. It was, first and foremost, a vital piece of communication technology.
That context is absolutely foundational. You have to get that first. For roughly 2 millennia, if you needed a precise, reliable, repeatable visual record of reality,
Or even a visual record of a shared cultural story.
the painter was the only available technology, period. They held a complete monopoly on visual documentation.
Let's think about the different jobs they had. A portrait artist wasn't just, making someone look good.
No, not at all.
They were providing official, verifiable documentation of a royal family member for things like marriage negotiations or succession records. This was legal and political paperwork, in a way.
And the historical painter wasn't just creating a dramatic scene. They were documenting key political events, a coronation, a treaty signing, a major battle. This was for posterity. This was the historical record.
This was the newsreel of its day.
Precisely. And of course, the religious painters had maybe the most crucial task of all, mass communication.
Right, because most of the population couldn't read.
For centuries, huge portions of the population were illiterate, so the church relied entirely on these massive, detailed, moralizing paintings to depict scripture.
To communicate these really complex religious narratives.
Stories of the saints, the Passion of Christ, scenes from Genesis. Painting was the visual textbook of the ancient and medieval world. If you needed a reliable visual, whether it was factual, political, or symbolic, the painter was the essential artisan you went to.
A perfect example of painting as almost journalistic reporting is Theodore Géricault's 1819 masterpiece, The Raft of the Medusa.
An incredible work.
This wasn't mythology. It wasn't some ancient story. It was a massive 16 by 23-foot canvas depicting a recent, specific, and incredibly scandalous shipwreck disaster.
And we really need to spend some time on this painting because it shows the old paradigm perfectly. Géricault didn't just imagine a scene.
No, he was a reporter.
He researched it forensically. He actually went out and interviewed the survivors of the shipwreck. He went to the morgue to study the colors and textures of the dead and the dying to get it right.
Which is incredibly intense.
It's unbelievably intense. He created this dramatic, cinematic, and profoundly realistic piece of documentation, a verifiable record of a true event.
This was high-stakes reporting. It was designed to shock the viewer and expose the incompetence of the French monarchy that actually caused the disaster in the first place.
And the power of that painting, its entire political and emotional force, rested entirely on its detailed, objective realism and its ability to communicate a precise historical moment.
And because getting that level of objective realism was so excruciatingly difficult. I mean, it took years of apprenticeship, mastery of anatomy, perspective, color mixing the patrons.
The church, the state, the rising elite.
They were all willing to pay a fortune for that accuracy. The painter's social and financial value was completely tied to their ability to provide this objective documentation.
Then around the 1830s and 1840s, the technological earthquake hits.
Here it comes.
We see the invention of practical photography, specifically the daguerreotype process, which is then followed very closely by the calotype. And in what felt like an instant, painting's primary function was rendered obsolete.
It's hard to overstate what a threat this was. The camera fundamentally undermined that core job description of objective recording.
Let's just look at the camera's mechanical advantages for a second. Early photography, it was slow by our standards, sure.
But compared to a painter,
Compared to a painter, it could record a face, a landscape, or a scene more accurately, capturing precise detail the human eye might miss. It could do it more quickly and, crucially, more cheaply than any artist could ever hope to.
think about the portrait painter. That was the bread and butter for so many artists.
Absolutely. Before the camera, a detailed, high-quality portrait took weeks of work. It required dozens of sittings with your subject, and it cost a fortune.
With the camera, especially the later wet plate processes, you could get a likeness captured in minutes.
For a fraction of the cost, the most difficult, high-value skill of the academic painter achieving a perfect, realistic likeness was suddenly democratized. It was industrialized. It was mechanized.
It's just gone.
Gone.
This shift forced artists to confront this just, brutal, fundamental question. If a machine can do our main job objective, detailed recording, better, faster, and cheaper than us, then what is the point of human-made painting?
What are we for? The camera exposed painting's limitations as a mere reporter. Think of it this way. Painting had always been constrained by time, by fatigue, by the inherent subjectivity of the human eye and hand.
Right.
The camera offered an unblinking, objective mechanical eye, capable of freezing a moment without any interpretation.
If painting had continued to compete with photography on the basis of objective reality, it was a losing battle.
A battle against mechanical speed and scientific precision. You can't win that fight.
So the really strategic realization for the smart, forward-thinking artists wasn't to double down on realism and try to paint more like a photo.
That was a dead end, doomed from the start.
The clever move was recognizing they had to pivot entirely. They had to explore territory the camera physically could not touch. They had to redefine what value meant in their field, moving away from documentation and toward interpretation.
And that's the strategic reframing that saved the art form. It's the move that launched the entire trajectory of what we call modern art.
Painting transformed from being a recording device.
A human photocopier.
Right, a human photocopier, into a medium for exploring the internal world. Perception, fleeting emotion, memory, the human condition.
The analogy our sources use is just perfect. The artists chose to become brain surgeons instead of continuing to compete with the X-ray machine.
Unpack that for me.
Well, the X-ray machine gives you objective data. It shows you the placement of the bones, the mechanical structure. It's pure information.
But the brain surgeon, they take that data and they integrate it with human experience, with non-mechanizable skill, with complex interpretation, and the result is a unique, unrepeatable outcome.
Exactly. Painting had to stop giving objective data and start giving subjective interpretation. That's the pivot, the shift from the fact of what is seen to the feeling of what is experienced.
In this technological crisis, it didn't happen in a vacuum, right?
Not at all. It hit at the exact moment when the established artistic, political, and social order was already starting to crumble.
Which provided the perfect conditions for a rebellion.
The perfect storm, really. It allowed this strategic pivot to actually succeed.
We absolutely have to detail that old power structure. For centuries, art was completely controlled by the art academies, especially the big one, the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris.
They were the gatekeepers.
Totally. They didn't just teach technique. They dictated taste, morality, and, most importantly, subject matter.
And their power was enforced through this rigid, incredibly detailed rulebook called the Hierarchy of Genres.
I find this fascinating. It was literally a ranked list of what was good art.
It was the definitive social status ranking for art subjects, and it was enforced through the annual, massively influential Paris Salon.
And the salon was everything.
Everything. If you were accepted into the salon, it meant wealth, fame, status, commissions would pour in. If you were rejected, you were basically an artistic nobody. Obscurity.
So what was at the top of this hierarchy?
At the very top, number one with a bullet, was history, painting, and mythology.
The big stuff.
The big stuff. These were the monumental allegories of biblical scenes, classical mythology, or major national historical events. This was the alpha material, the highest ranked, most moral, and usually the largest paintings.
Okay, so what's next down the ladder?
After that, you have portraiture, which was respectable because it was about documenting important people.
Kings, generals, popes.
Exactly. Then you get genre painting. These are scenes of everyday life. This is where our dudes at a bar would fall.
So already a few rungs down.
Oh yeah. Below that, landscape. And finally, at the absolute bottom of the barrel was still life.
A bowl of fruit, a dead fish.
Right. If you painted a bowl of fruit, you were considered a mere technician, just a decorator. But if you painted Napoleon crossing the Alps, you were a genius, a philosopher, a cultural icon.
And the sources are really clear about the political function of this hierarchy.
Extremely clear. The highest ranked subjects, history and mythology, were commissioned almost exclusively by the elite.
The state, the monarchy, the church.
And they served a very specific purpose. They were high-budget, state-sponsored propaganda.
They were pushing a message.
Absolutely. These paintings were designed to push specific narratives of power, of morality, of national identity. They told the public what to believe and who to revere. They validated the ruling class and the existing social order.
So to be a successful academic painter was to be, in essence, a highly paid court employee.
Whose primary job was affirming the status quo.
So then the 19th century arrives, and it brings with it rapid industrialization, urbanization, massive social upheaval.
And this increasing push for democratic thought.
And that old guard patronage system and the stories it was telling, it all starts to lose its absolute authority.
The official myths of kings and gods just start to feel increasingly remote. Irrelevant to the lived experience of the modern citizen who's navigating a smoky city filled with steam engines and factories.
This is what drove that crucial shift in authenticity.
Yes. For the younger, more rebellious generation of artists, we're talking about the realists like Gustave Courbet, continuing to paint historical scenes they'd never witnessed.
We're just recycling old stories about Greek gods.
It felt intellectually dishonest. It felt cowardly. It felt like theatrical pretense, like playing dress-up.
They embraced this harsh new logic, and it's so perfectly encapsulated by Courbet himself.
He's such a pivotal figure.
He famously declared, "Show me an angel and I'll paint one."
Which is just an incredible statement. It's revolutionary.
What's he really saying there?
He's declaring that art must deal only with the observable, the tangible, the contemporary. It was a direct political attack on the entire hierarchy of genres, which relied on the unquestioning acceptance of invisible or historically remote subjects.
Be calling their bluff.
He is. Courbet and his contemporaries, they looked at the academic painters who were still churning out these neoclassical scenes of, gladiator fights or pristine Roman gardens.
Often painted indoors, in a stuffy studio, using hired models wearing cheap costumes.
Right. And they said, that's artificial. That is LARPing.
LARPing, that's perfect.
The real drama, the real suffering, the real truth is happening right outside the studio door. They found painting the raw, uncomfortable truth of modern life to be the only honest and therefore the only truly hardcore artistic pursuit left.
It was a total rejection of the dusty museum approach to art.
They wanted to create a living document of their own rapidly changing era, an era filled with new technologies, new social classes, new anxieties.
They elevated the modern subject precisely because it was relevant. and relevance became their new measure of artistic courage.
In this philosophical shift, it was powerfully reinforced by a very practical economic reality.
They had to make a living.
The artists had to respond to a changing market. The market for those incredibly expensive, massive paintings of ancient myths commissioned by the declining aristocracy was shrinking fast.
So artists, especially the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, they needed new buyers.
And the key economic factor here was the rise of an educated, wealthy, industrialized middle class, the bourgeoisie.
And this new market segment, they didn't want a massive moralizing painting of some obscure Roman emperor hanging over their smaller urban mantelpiece.
So what did this new buyer want? What were they looking for?
They wanted a canvas that reflected their own immediate lives, their modern city, their leisure activities, their personal everyday experiences.
They wanted art they could relate to, art that was intimate in scale and contemporary in subject, something that spoke to them, not at them.
And this created a whole new market ecosystem, completely outside the control of the Academy.
Figures like the Parisian art dealer Paul Durand-Ruel become absolutely crucial.
He was a game changer.
He wasn't relying on the state for commissions. He was going out and buying work directly from artists like Monet and Renoir, and then successfully selling them to this growing middle class in Paris, in London, in New York.
He created a parallel system, a commercial route to success that completely circumvented the establishment's power.
And therefore, painting a scene of laundrywomen or a factory district or a street filled with ordinary citizens, a genre scene that used to be ranked so low.
It becomes a double win.
Exactly. It became simultaneously a political move, a declaration of independence from the state narrative, and a brilliant commercial move tapping into this wealthy new buying class.
It was a way of declaring that the life and the experience of the people mattered just as much as a king's history.
They broke the power of the hierarchy. By elevating the commonplace modern subject, they challenged the entire social order that art had previously served.
They just threw out the academic rulebook. And they dared to assert that a moment of personal modern experience could be just as profound and valuable as any ancient myth.
And that right there is the pivot from mandated top-down truth to personal observed truth.
So once the artists jettisoned this obligation to objectively record objective reality, a job the camera was now doing better, they were finally free.
Free to focus entirely on what the camera literally could not do, capturing subjective experience, sensation, and time itself.
This is the ultimate philosophical shift, isn't it?
This is the core of it, and it brings us directly to Impressionism, a movement whose name itself reflects this very strategy. They were painting impressions, not fixed facts.
Right. A camera, scientifically, captures one objective instant. It's a fixed, stable record of what was in front of the lens during that 1/250th of a second. It stops time.
But the work of Claude Monet, especially his extended series paintings,
The haystacks, the poplars, the Rouen Cathedral series.
those demonstrate this radical shift perfectly. Monet wasn't recording what an object looked like as a static fact. He was showing how light feels and transforms across minutes, hours, and entire seasons.
He was painting the layering of memory and perception over objective physical reality.
Let's get into the specifics of how they did this, because it involves some really sophisticated color theory. An academic painter, they created realistic shadows and what's called local color by pre-mixing the precise colors on their palette. They'd mix white with black to get gray, or mix blue and yellow to get green before it ever touched the canvas.
He was very controlled.
Very. The Impressionists abandoned this entirely. They used a technique called optical mixing.
Meaning your eye does the work.
Your eye does the work. They would apply separate dabs or broken brush strokes of pure color, say, separate strokes of blue and yellow right next to each other on the canvas. When you step back, your eye, your retina, does the mixing for them.
And the result is this incredibly vibrant, luminous surface.
It captures the sensory experience of shimmering light far more effectively than those pre-mixed deadened colors ever could. It vibrates.
And this is where the technical detail of light wavelength becomes crucial, but in a very experiential way.
It does. Monet wasn't just documenting light in a general sense. He was exploring the physics of color as a sensation. He was trying to capture how the specific visible spectrum, that 400 to 700 nanometer wavelength, how that was hitting his retina at that precise moment of the afternoon.
So the finished painting isn't data.
No, it's the unstable subjective record of that specific sensory encounter. It's an experience, not a fact.
You nailed it. It's the difference between seeing a factual report of the weather, It was 75 degrees and sunny, and reading a poetic description of the warm light hitting your skin and the sensation of humidity in the air.
That's a great way to put it. You can photograph the cathedral. Anyone can.
But you can't photograph the emotional impact of the light shifting over the stone as the day progresses, filtered through the memory and the mood of a single sensitive human eye. The camera can't capture a vibe.
And beyond just light, they began to emphasize the physicality of expression. Photography, even early photography, was always striving for smoothness and uniformity. It tried to minimize any visible trace of the mechanical process.
Right, to make it look like a perfect window onto reality.
But post-photography painting did the absolute opposite. It celebrated the process of creation, the turbulence, the materiality of the medium itself.
We see this so dramatically in a technique known as impasto.
Thick, textured applications of paint where the brush strokes are highly visible, almost sculptural.
Think of the contrast. An academic painter, like Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, he often worked to make the surface of his painting so smooth and polished that the paint itself almost disappeared.
The focus was purely on the illusion of reality. You weren't supposed to see the paint.
But the post-photographic artists, from Van Gogh to the later Expressionists, they celebrated that texture.
The visible, thick, turbulent brushstroke, it transmits the emotional intensity of the artist directly to the viewer. When you look at Van Gogh's The Starry Night, the stars don't just exist as points of light.
They are swirling, emotionally charged objects. The paint literally screams off the canvas.
And that emotional distortion, that visual representation of an internal state, is something the cold, objective mechanical lens simply cannot convey. The art is now an emotional object in and of itself.
And this emphasis on subjectivity brings us right back to those everyday subjects, the modern human condition. The sources argue that paintings of people in urban settings weren't trivial at all.
No, they were deep psychological studies. They were the perfect vehicle for this new subjective focus.
And the definitive example has to be Edouard Manet's A Bar at the Folies Bergère, painted in 1882.
The ultimate example of the modern urban subject being elevated to monumental status. It's not just documenting a bartender and some drinks.
No, it's a forensic examination of modern psychology.
Let's break down the social critique that's inherent in that canvas. Look at the barmaid, Suzanne.
Her gaze is direct, but it's also distant. It conveys this profound sense of isolation, even though she's surrounded by the buzz and the crowd of the Parisian nightlife.
She is physically present, but she is psychologically completely absent.
Then you have this confusing, almost impossible reflection in the mirror behind her.
The man standing across from her, who seems to be the customer, is only visible in the reflection, and his placement seems geographically impossible based on her actual stance in the real space.
And Suzanne's own reflection is different too. It's angled differently, and she appears engaged with the customer, leaning forward.
While the real Suzanne just stares listlessly ahead, looking completely drained.
That visual discrepancy, it's not a mistake in perspective, is it?
Not a chance. It's Manet's deliberate commentary on the complexity and alienation of modern urban life. The painting is showing the difference between the role we play in public
The reflective, engaging self, the image in the mirror.
and the internal lonely self, the bored, vacant gaze of the real barmaid.
Manet, Degas with his studies of isolated working ballet dancers.
They were using these so-called low-genre subjects to dissect class, commerce, gender roles, and the profound psychological effects of anonymity in the big city.
They use the modern moment to discuss eternal human themes. Loneliness, detachment, the pressures of society.
And this move fundamentally elevates that fleeting modern moment to the profound level that was previously reserved only for history painting.
Okay, we need to acknowledge the logical counterpoint again, because it's a strong one.
Sure.
If the camera couldn't do fantasy, why didn't the painters just double down on that? They still had a total monopoly on painting Satan's armies or historical events from long ago or purely imagined narratives.
Right. Why abandon the epic entirely in favor of the bar scene?
Exactly. Why not just paint things a camera could never see?
And the answer, according to our sources, is found in the concepts of artistic courage and intellectual honesty.
Okay.
For the young rebels, the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, continuing to paint ancient myths or historical scenes would have been seen as intellectual and artistic cowardice.
Cowardice, that's a strong word.
It is, but they would have seen it as a deliberate retreat into a safe, commercially viable past that was rapidly losing its cultural relevance.
They would have been hiding in the shadow of the academies, just repeating tired old propaganda.
And willfully ignoring the explosive, innovative, and frankly revolutionary industrial world that was rushing forward right outside their studio windows. They saw that path not as a difficult artistic pursuit, but as a flight from innovation and contemporary relevance.
So it was about being present in their own time.
The sources refer to these innovators as the cultural agitators of their day. They weren't just seeking beauty, they were actively trying to dismantle the rigid establishment of the Paris Salon.
It was a profoundly revolutionary act to declare that a smoky, dingy railway station
Or a group of working women folding laundry.
was worthy of the same monumental attention that was previously reserved only for kings and gods.
They dared to make a masterpiece out of something that the establishment considered boring or lowbrow.
To them, documenting the truth of the present, however messy or trivial it seemed, was the most courageous and most truthful act they could perform.
It was a calculated and highly effective middle finger to the entire academic system.
And this attitude connects directly back to that idea of capturing the now.
Right. Let's revisit the argument that this new art was the original manual social media feed of its time.
I think this is a fantastic analogy because it really places their work in terms of urgency and documentation.
In the 1870s, there was no mass media, no Instagram feed, no instant documentation of daily life. The most vibrant, immediate way to show what was happening.
To capture the current technological moment, the new fashions, the contemporary social landscape.
Was through painting and drawing, they were documenting their present with an intense urgency.
Think about the specific snapshots. Degas' sketches of women in millinery shops or his ballet rehearsals. They weren't just pretty pictures.
No, they were behind-the-scenes stories of specific contemporary labor industries and leisure activities. They were showing you how the modern world worked.
And Monet's paintings of the Gare Saint-Lazare train station in Paris, they weren't just landscapes.
They were snapshots of cutting-edge industrial technology. He was capturing the atmospheric effects of steam, steel, and speed, the very symbols of modernity.
So if an artist in 1875 had chosen to paint a meticulously detailed, hyper-realistic tribute to the French Revolution of 1789,
It would have felt like a purely academic exercise, a retro fascination.
the Impressionists were basically saying, forget 1789, look at the coal smoke and steam filling the air right now. That's our history. This is what matters.
And this helps us understand what actually happened to all that epic content. The grand mythological narrative, it didn't just vanish entirely.
It migrated.
It strategically migrated to new media platforms that were better suited for its display.
Because what is the real strength of a monumental allegory? Its scale, its movement, its total immersion, and narrative sweep.
And oil paint on a static canvas, as brilliant as it is, has serious limitations in depicting those things in sequence.
Then film was invented.
And film instantly took over the job of the grand, sprawling, heroic narrative because it could move, it could capture motion, it could tell a story across hours and miles.
A film like Lawrence of Arabia, or a modern superhero blockbuster, or Lord of the Rings.
These are the modern versions of those monumental 19th century history paintings. They are the new vessels for our shared cultural myths. Cinema proved to be the superior medium for total, continuous narrative immersion.
And what about the other side of the epic? The really detailed visualization of pure fantasy and world building.
That responsibility migrated directly to concept art.
Ah, for video games and movies.
Exactly. The artists who, in 1820, would have been painting meticulously detailed mythological battles are now the lead concept artists designing the futuristic cities of Blade Runner or the immense, chaotic war zones of Warhammer 40K.
These digital platforms allow for the scale, the detail, and the pure fantasy that oil paint on canvas always struggled to compete with.
So, the painters of the late 19th century executed the ultimate strategic power move. They recognized the shift. They willingly handed off the old job to the new, more suitable media.
And they focused entirely on the unique, subjective, and unmechanizable job that only the human hand and soul could perform.
And this decision fundamentally redefined what alpha even meant in the art world.
The old alpha virtue was defined by technical mastery in service of tradition and upholding established power structures.
The new alpha virtue became authenticity, innovation, and personal subjective vision.
It took far more courage to invent a new way of seeing the world, to make a masterpiece out of a foggy bridge, than it did to just perfect an old established style.
They successfully redefined their entire field, not by battling the future, but by strategically retreating to and fortifying the only ground the future couldn't claim.
They traded the borrowed glory of ancient myths for the raw, vibrant, and incredibly valuable truth of their own subjective time. So here's where this whole story becomes this enduring lesson in strategic adaptation. This entire massive historical event, this pivot, it wasn't a defeat for painting at all. It was a stunning, almost paradoxical success story.
By embracing subjective truth and the seemingly trivial, they achieved something that objective photography could never do.
They forced us to look at the trivial, the dude at the bar, the fog on the river, the haystacks, and see the profound.
They elevated that triviality to essential, profound historical documentation. The fact that we now see paintings like a bar at the Folies Bergère in museums and find them infinitely complex and deeply moving.
Even though we are constantly inundated with millions of objective photos of contemporary life,
That proves the artists won the strategic battle.
painting got fundamentally more powerful.
It absolutely did, because it stopped competing with machines on facts and started competing on feeling.
It started doing what only the individual soul and the human hand can achieve, conveying internal state and unique perception.
They didn't just document their moment, they forced future generations to see the eternal human condition in a fleeting, modern context. That's true genius.
And that raises a really important question for you, the listener, to sort of mull over as you move forward into our own intensely technological world.
The camera forced painting to abandon objective reality for subjective truth. So what ubiquitous dominant technology today, perhaps advanced generative AI or complex augmented reality systems, is forcing its corresponding industries
Be it writing, software design, or even strategic analysis.
to abandon its current day job and strategically pivot toward the truly unique, subjective, creative, or personal value that only humans can provide.
What is the next unphotographable territory being invented right now, and who will be the artistic rebels brave enough to claim it?